As we continue through our series in the book of Psalms, we are now at Psalm 131. This is another one of these very short Psalms. It's only 3 verses, but it's kind of unique in what it teaches us. And that's something I really hadn't thought a whole lot about until I started studying for this Psalm. So kind of a little bit of way of introduction. So Psalm 131, I titled it So Simple. Have you ever wanted to truly know how to approach God? To come into his presence with the right state of mind and heart, not in the normal way of prayer or request, but in a real conversation as with a father or a friend. A different way of approaching God than what maybe sometimes we think, because we're so taught to go to God in prayer, which is good. We're supposed to do that. We're totally taught that we have trials, we have troubles. We are to go to God, and he will hear us, and he will help us. We're to go to God because we are grateful and thankful. We're praising him for something. Have you ever thought of the idea of just going to God just to talk? Nothing particular on your mind to talk about, nothing that you might say you're wanting from him, nothing that you might say in regards to confessing sin, but just basically going before the throne of God just to have a conversation. Kind of like you would have with a friend, where you're sitting there, you might say, on the bank of a river, in a park, on a bench, in your living room, whatever. And you're just sitting there with a friend, and you two are talking about a whole lot of different things, but nothing really in particular. It's not intentional that, well, we got to talk about this or we got to talk about that. No, we just talk. And we've all done it. We've all had those times where there was no agenda. It simply was a case of, we're going to talk. And we want to spend time with each other. So because we get along, we like each other, and so we like to spend time together. And what we talk about is totally unimportant. It might end up going into some important things, maybe not. It doesn't really matter. It might simply be, it starts off with talking about the weather, but instead of that, it goes on to more and more things. So this psalm really is kind of pointing us towards this idea. And it is a solitary conversation with the Lord, not a discourse before men. See, when David is writing this psalm, he is simply having a talk with God. He's not going there with a bunch of petitions or anything else. And he's going before God alone. He's not going, and you might say, to do this, you might say, this prayer out there with everybody sees. No, it's just him and God. So this little song of David is a model of the state of mind in which the poet expresses his inner thoughts. He did not push himself forward, but suffered himself to be drawn forth out of seclusion. See, he wasn't pushing his way into the conversation with God. He was being drawn into the conversation. And we've had that same experience too with friends, where here again, we didn't have anything particular, but the conversation goes in this way or that way, and we're just drawn into it, and it's good. It's not like it's drawn into a problem or where there's an agenda. It just simply developed. He, that is David, did not take possession of the throne violently. And this kind of gives us the heart of David and kind of an understanding of how he looked at things. But after Samuel had anointed him, he willingly and patiently traversed the long, thorny, roundabout way of deep abasement, until he received from God's hands that which God promised had assured to him. The persecution by Saul lasted about 10 years, and his kingship in Hebron at first only insipid 7 years and a half. He left it entirely to God to remove Saul and Shishbeth and let Shimei curse. He left Jerusalem before Absalom. Submission to God's guidance, recognition to his dispensations, content to that which was allotted to him are the distinguishing traits of this noble character. And that's a quote from a theologian in France, and I don't have no idea how to pronounce his last name, nor is that a big deal. David patiently waited for God. David didn't try to push. He knew he was going to be king, and yet all this time goes by and it's not happening. But he didn't make this mistake of Abraham and Sarah. If you remember back, they had this promise from God that Sarah and Abraham would have a child. And they waited and they waited and they got older and older and they decided to help God out. And we're still suffering the consequences of that sin today. David didn't do that. David patiently waited for God to work things out. And there's a lot of credit to him. Last time we did Psalm 130, and at the end of that is verse 8. And he will redeem Israel from all his iniquities. See, the man who is of nature once sincere and sweet will even be more humbled by the sense of an understanding, undeserved forgiveness, that by the memory of the sin from which he has cleansed him. And I thought that was interesting. This is a quote from Samuel Cox. The fact that the memory of the sin is necessary, or what we're looking for. We are so looking back to the fact that we were forgiven. We were undeserved, but we were forgiven. Very fitly, therefore, does the psalm humbly follow the psalm which sings of the divine loving kindness and tender mercy. See, we had that last time. I will redeem Israel from all his iniquities. See, Psalm 131 follows 130, and the two fit together quite nicely. And it's for us to trust our God in this way. Verse 1. O Lord, my heart is not proud, nor my eyes haughty, nor do I involve myself in great matters, or in things too difficult me. See, David starts off with, my heart is not proud. He begins with his heart, for that's the center of our nature. Who can know it unless the Spirit of God tells us? We know our own hearts are sinful. And David is coming to God saying, my heart's not proud. I'm not going to go that way. I'm not going to come with you with that way. I'm here to sit down and have just a conversation. And I'm not coming at it from the perspective of being proud. And there's a whole list of things that we're going to look at. So the heart, which is the center of our nature. And if we have God teach us our heart, show us our heart, and guide our heart, then we can understand. Then we can have that conversation. And continuing with verse 1, nor are my eyes haughty. Eyes, okay? The haughty eyes. You know, haughty means arrogantly superior and disdainful. That's what haughty is. See, what the heart desires, the eyes look for. When the heart is right, the eyes are right. The whole man is on the road to a healthier and happy condition. The eye is the mirror of the soul. And that is so true for us. Because what the heart desires, the eyes look for. We desire to have that time with our God, to sit down with him as our friend, who is somebody, I mean, he's God, but still we can spend time with him as a friend. Then that's what we go look for. That's what our eyes then search out for. Now, if we have the mindset of a judgmental God, then that's how our mind is going to go. That's how we're going to think. And then the other extreme is we think of a loving God. Well, if we think of loving without thinking of righteousness, we just have loving, you just be good to me all the time no matter what. When we have that mindset, we also have haughty eyes. So, and continuing in verse 1, nor do I involve myself in great matters. Now, this is one that a lot of people really can have difficulty with, because we have all the great things that are going on, all these things that are happening in our world, and whether that be in the nation or the world or even in our own homes. And these great important matters, I have to deal with this. This is important and this is the priority. And David is saying, don't focus there. Don't focus on those things that we consider big deals. Just don't involve yourself in things that we consider big deals. We just need to have that sit down with our God, and we're going to see more of that here in a minute. Because the great and wonderful things is speaking of God's secret purposes and sovereign means for their accomplishment, in which man is not called to cooperate, but to acquiesce. See, the great and wonderful things that God is his secret purposes. There are so many things that our God does we don't understand. And David is saying, that's fine. We don't need to understand. It's not necessary for us to understand. His sovereignty, his means in the way that he works. And the same thing is true when we talk about his sovereignty and salvation. How that all works, we can't understand. That's beyond us. Right? So we don't sit around trying to get answers to these questions, but to acquiesce them, to accept something. Just accept God said it, so it's so. It's that simple. Okay, I don't need to understand everything about God. Matter of fact, it would be bad if I could, because then I would be equal to God. Continuing in verse 1, or things too difficult for me. It is just on God's part that those who wish to be everything should end up being nothing. When we plan on and we try to strive for to be everything. It was one of the things that's almost kind of a side note that I learned quite a number of years ago when we moved from Michigan to Tennessee. And you were going to hire a contractor to do something. See, in Michigan, there was an understanding that if a contractor came to you and said that we do everything, you stayed away from them. Because if they say they do everything, they do nothing well. Okay? Come down here, and that was the common phrase. We do everything. Okay? And we come to find out they didn't do anything well. Okay? The rarity was, no, this is what we do. Okay? So it comes to nothing that when they have that mindset, and we can have that mindset in our own lives, we can have that mindset of, I can handle it, I can deal with it. No matter what it is, no matter how big or small, I'll take care of it. We'll take care of nothing, because we come to nothing, because we don't take care of anything. We just need to have that sit down with God and that friendly conversation. Verse 2, surely I have composed and quieted my soul, like a weaned child rests against his mother. My soul is like a weaned child within me. So the first part of that, surely I have composed and quieted my soul. Quieted, stilled, hushed, reduced to silence. Here again, we're having that sit down with God. It's not important that we try to interject our thoughts, our concepts. It is that we are just to be in his presence and sit there and listen. And at times we may speak, but then we listen. So we should be stilled. See, I must rest in God because I know who he is and what he has done. Not because I know what he can do for me. See, can be another thing that we do. We go to God and we want to sit down with him, but we got that arrogance in our back of our mind of thinking that, God, you can fix this. And I'm going to get the conversation around to that. No, that's arrogance. We know what he can do. We accept that. But we also know that sometimes it is better just to wait for things to develop in his timing, not in our own. And the other thing that we have is we plan. Okay, we make all these great plans. What do you have planned? Now that we're getting close to the end of this year, what are our plans for next year? What things do we plan on accomplishing? Now, there's nothing wrong with having goals. That's what, matter of fact, some planning is a wise idea. But when we put all of our effort, all of our focus into the things that we are going to accomplish next year, we might be in for a surprise. But if we're just sitting there dependent upon and spending time with and conversing with our God instead of ourselves, because that's who we end up conversing with, things will go much smoother. And that's really not the goal. The goal is just to spend time with Him. Like that again, like that of a friend. So next year will be next year. We'll just deal with whatever happens. We don't worry about it. We have no reason to. I have composed and quieted my soul. So now we've gotten to the point, okay, now I'm beginning to understand what it means to have this conversation with God. So I've just quieted my soul, not in meditation, okay? Set that aside. We can meditate on God, but we're just kind of clearing our heads. And this is what we do. So the question is, how do I compose and quiet myself in the midst of all that I'm facing in my life? We have all these things going on, all these trials, these difficulties, and how do we quiet ourselves down? This is one of the most difficult things for a human being to do, especially when they're in the middle of a stressful situation, is to just quiet yourself down. So I ran across this list. Okay, and I thought it was pretty good. It says, first, get a grip on yourself. Okay, stop thinking that, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Instead of just, okay, stop. For a moment, that's it. Just stop. Okay, identify your areas of pride, because generally that's where a lot of our difficulty comes in. We have this concept of pride. I can't do this, or I won't do that. I can't say this. I can't say that because I'm going to look weak. You know, people are going to see me as weak if I do that, and our pride gets in the way. And then silence your desires, opinions, and agendas, irritabilities, anxieties, and fears. So silence these down. Stop. Your desires, my desires, unless they're focused on my God, they're no good. My opinion, the value of my opinion you can carry in your pocket and the pocket be empty. Okay? That's what opinions are worth. Agendas, okay, I've got this thing I'm going to make happen. I'm going to work all this out. I'm going to take this person and I'm going to have them start doing that. Forget it. Irritabilities, okay, those things that just bug us. Had this on the guys' weekend. It's just one of those things that I find irritating, but I kind of try to let it go. And that's when we're up in kind of up houses up on a hill here. The water is down quite a ways, but it's probably maybe 300 feet in between the dock and the house. And there's one of the grandsons with his radio that is down in the dock, but he's sitting up at the house. But of course, with Bluetooth, he can just adjust the thing. So he cranks it up so everybody can hear it clearly. Okay? I find that irritating. It's really, in reality, it's not a big deal. Let's face it, it really isn't a big thing. But it's just kind of an irritability, as an example. Okay? Anxieties. I've got these things going on in my life, and I'm just worried about them. And my fears, I'm fear that this isn't going to turn out good. All this has to go away. Replace all those things with Christ. Focus on Him. And if our focus more is on what Christ has done for us, what He continues to do for us, and we get all these other things pushed out of the way. If we got them pushed out of the way, now there's a void, and we need to fill that void with Christ. Look for strength from God to accomplish this. Cast yourself on him. Don't try to do it yourself. Just trust. Just trust God, because he will take care of the things. And then have a psalm-generated conversation with yourself. Then go to the Lord with that conversation. And a psalm-generated conversation means take a psalm, and take pretty much any psalm. And as you're reading through it, it sets your mind right. It will, because there are, in the Psalms, we have this whole host of things that are covered. All the ways from confession to praise to terrible things to wonderful things, they're all there. And this also goes back to another concept, and that is praying the Word of God, which is an extremely helpful thing to do. There's times when we want to go to God in prayer. We're not talking about that in here, but there's times when we want to do that. It does help to take a psalm and use that as our prayer. Praying God's words back to him is very comforting. But now we're talking about getting ourselves into that state of mind where we're getting all of the worldly anxieties and troubles pushed aside, and now we're just sitting down as a friend. And we're spending that time with him. Our mind is no longer being drawn into all the other things because we've kicked them out. We got a hold of ourselves. And then the number 9 is live out this psalm. As we understand this psalm more and more, we need to apply it to our lives. Verse 2 again, like a weaned child rests against his mother. Okay, this is interesting poetry, but it has this wonderful meaning behind it. See, prior to being weaned, a child goes to his mother for substance. Okay, once they're weaned, the child goes for comfort. What does this child want from his mother? Just comfort. And the child, at this point, still, you might say, may not be talking, may not really understand a lot, but the child just feels that comfort in his mother's arms, just doing nothing but hanging out. You ever thought about that? Your babies are, 6 months old, and they just want to hang out with you. That's what they want. We need to get that mindset ourselves where I'm not getting into the deep theological discussions with God. I just want to hang out with him. I want to hang out with my Jesus. Continuing verse 2. My soul is like a weaned child within me. And almost like, okay, we said the same thing. We just talked about that. Well, now there's a little difference, okay? See, this peace and comfort, that sustains me. I'm overwhelmed in his presence while knowing I'm safe as in my mother's arms. Knowing that in the arms of God I am safe. And I can't really experience that in the same way that I can when I was a little child and I would have a problem of any sort. Because little children have problems that we consider just little things. Okay? But they need that comfort. Okay? And that comfort is the safety in mother's arms. Because that's where I've been. That's where I have experienced. That's where I understand. And if I understand that child within me, it feels that same safety, that same comfort, just sitting there with my God and talking. Verse 3 starts off, O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forever. We could say, O SonLight, hope in the Lord. Learn to desire God for himself and not use him to fulfill your desires. Catch that? Learn. We need to learn how to desire God just for who God is. Not because of what he can do, not because of what he's done. We just want to have time with him. Because our hope is in the Lord. But the desire is just to spend time with God. I need to get that park bench. I need to get that riverbank. I need to get that couch. I need to get that recliner. I need to get that place to where when I'm there, I'm just sitting there having a conversation with my God. Almost like, but not exactly like, your imaginary friend. Okay? So that when you're sitting there in the chair, you're by yourself, and you're having this conversation with God, and you're talking out loud, and somebody's around the corner trying to figure out what in the world is going on. Have you gone totally wacko here? You have an imaginary friend or something? No, I'm just spending time with my God. You're not supposed to be here. This is just time for the two of us. We spend this time together. And we spend that time not on anything important, not on anything big. We're just hanging out. More in verse 3. Hope in the Lord. And we can hope in the Lord because of who he is. He's our covenant God. He's the God of Israel. Remember that he is Jehovah. He is wise in his plans, good in his purpose, strong to execute, and that he will withhold no good thing from them that walk uprightly. These are all promises we've received from our God. He's a covenant God. He makes promises. And when God makes a promise, it is the same thing as being fulfilled. See, when people make a promise, they do need to fulfill it, and maybe most of the time they do, depending on the person. With God, a promise is as good as done, because he never goes back on a promise. So he makes this covenant. That's what a covenant is. A covenant is a promise. And we remember who he is. He is our God, and one thing that God cannot do is lie. The opposite of Satan, because that's all he can do is lie, but not our God. And our God is wise in his plan. He's good in his purpose. See, his plans are wise, wisdom way beyond what we can grasp. But he has a plan, and that plan is going to be fulfilled. And then how he fulfills it, his purpose is good. It is good that what he has planned. We will see that. And he's strong. He has the power to actually execute it. And then he'll withhold nothing good from those people that love him. And he loves them that walk uprightly. It's like, okay, as long as I'm good, God, then you're going to do stuff for me? No, God does stuff for us, and we're just grateful. Our response is being grateful for what God has done. Not that God does it because I did this. It's the opposite. It's that hanging out again. Just that spending time together. More on verse 3. From this time forth and forever. Do not be weary. This is from Adam Clark. It was another great line. Do not be weary. Trust forever. Your case can never be out of the reach of God's power and mercy. See, there's nothing outside of God's power, and there's nothing outside of his mercy. Because who he is, and we really grasp this reality of who our God is, how great he is. And everything that he has planned is good. Wouldn't that just be the most wonderful person to just hang out with? Because everything about him is goodness and kindness. He has the strength and the power to do whatever he decides. But it doesn't mean that when we're sitting together that all of a sudden he's got to show this. He's got to display this. It's who he is. You ever sat down with a person that truly is focused in one area or another in their life? No matter what it is, doesn't matter. They're confident of their opinions. They're confident of everything about them in that area. And then he comes to people that know everything about everything. Okay, and they're confident of that too. And at first it's interesting. After a while it starts becoming irritating because some of the stuff that they're coming up with, like, this kind of question this. But see, with our God, he doesn't have to prove himself. So many times we've heard people say, if God would just do something to show himself, to prove himself. Let's see, there's a thing called creation. That didn't just happen. So if God did creation, he no longer needs to prove himself. He's already proven it. His loving kindness, well, there's the cross. God doesn't need to prove himself. We just need to understand of who he is, his greatness and his glory, and then know that we can actually sit down with him as with a friend and have a conversation, talking about whatevers. The conversation need not go into anything big or asking for this or expecting that. It is just, I'm hanging out with my God. This psalm, to me, was just fascinating to see this different approach. There's so many times when we have looked at prayer, and we've looked at confession, we've looked at petition, and all those are good. Those are wonderful things. They're part of who our God calls us to do. We are to basically bring people before the throne. We are to, you might say, uphold people in prayer, to pray for the sick, to pray for those that are in need. All of those are wonderful things. Okay? This is different. This is unique. It's unique in the standpoint that if I can get rid of myself, because that's what it takes first, and then I can just sit down and have this time with my God. Just like a friend. No agenda, not looking to get anything, not looking to confess anything, just sitting around talking. God, that's great weather we got today, isn't it? It really is nice. I really like this warmth and that sunshine. Oh man, it just feels so good. The other day I had to go over here and do this and that, and and it was kind of enjoyable. I met up with these people, and we talked about different things. And you ever thought of talking to God that way? I haven't either. This psalm taught me so much. Okay, and since I started learning it, I started trying to do it. It takes some discipline because I got to get rid of self. I got to get rid of pride. I got to get rid of arrogance. But as I push that out, and I just fill with the knowledge that I'm sitting with my God, in reality, not just superficially, not just making it up. It's not the invisible friend. It's the real God.